we can start. People join if they're kind of running late. First, I just want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today, as well as our panelists and moderator. We're really excited about this topic. As we all know, everything's moving online, events, how we communicate, and we have an amazing panel today to talk just about that. So thank you everyone for joining and for being a part of SF's Big, and I'm gonna turn it over to Chris to introduce the panel now.
Thanks very much, and again, thank you everyone for sharing your lunch with us. We really appreciate it. In the middle of this strange transition we are all seeing from, is it hybrid? Is it online? Is it something strange in between? And we're all having to fight it. And we've put together what we think is a pretty interesting panel that will give you different sight lines, different optics for how you can look at this problem. And Dave Boyll, we'll start with you. Quick little background on you, please.
Sure. Well, I'm David Boyll. I am Senior Director, Oracle Studios and Media Technology within Oracle Corporate Marketing. We are responsible for the video lifecycle at Oracle, including live virtual events and the operation of our HQ studios, as well as the technology which underpins it. I love events and I can't wait to get back to the physical world, but for now, this is what we got.
Did you ever think we'd be missing conferences? Michelle, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Michelle Excel. I run a consulting company called the Antipodean. So I describe myself as a creative technology strategist, but specializing in immersive technology. So everything digital, plus all of the really immersive stuff, like augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, IoT, all manner of techie things. And what I do is I help agencies and brands figure out what's going on with them, and how we can meld the two and develop them a roadmap. So I come from a long line of ad agencies and digital agencies before that. So been working a lot of consumer marketing, and we've been doing a lot of virtual events. So yeah, really excited to bridge the enterprise consumer chat today and see what all sorts of people are creating.
Excellent. And speaking of agencies, Helena Öhman, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Helena Öhman. I'm a VP of production at Edelman San Francisco and also part of the SF Big board. So I'm really excited to be on this panel because I'm kind of in between both of our panelists here. I've spent most of my time realizing, virtual, digital brand experiences beyond just events. So I've been involved in all sorts of new tech and comms as it relates to Edelman, both here and in Sweden, where I led the studio for Edelman Deportivo.
Excellent. And I think Dave said it best. We're trying to figure out, how we move to this new world, and also, we're consumers of this as well. So I'd love to hear from the panel sort of what's the last virtual event you attended and what you thought about it. And Michelle, we'll start with you.
Cool. So I actually have notes so I don't misquote anybody. So it was a concert series, 3-day concert series put on at Red Rocks. If everyone's familiar with Red Rocks, a lot of concerts go on there over the course of the year. So it was put on by Visible, who I think are a new telco. It was called Red Rocks Unpaused. So live streamed. So they couldn't have anyone actually come to Red Rocks in person, obviously, but they decided to keep their sponsorship and live stream the entire 3 days. So I tuned in on one day. Now, how I got to see about this or got to hear about this was through friends at a production company, one of the production companies involved. And the interesting thing about this, they didn't just live stream it. They really wanted to give attendees at home the feeling of being there together, and also the artists, the feeling of people at home being there in person. So they developed a couple of interactive tools where you could emote. So think Facebook Live, right? And you're emoting. But those emoticons actually showed up in visible ways to the artists at Red Rocks and created a feedback loop where people at home could also see their presence there. There was projection mapping, lights on stage, all sorts of things. So it had this really nice feedback loop. And I think I was quite surprised by the comments and the interaction when I arrived there. And it was really surprising to see normal people. We talk a lot about us industry folk and what we think of things, but normal fans showing up and just commenting and expressing their joy, and yeah, really, really good live feedback. It was pretty special. Yeah.
That's interesting, because you're bringing up something very interesting, which is how do we create and instantiate community around what has been sort of online, like we're doing here with Zoom, kind of a broadcast medium. And Helena, I know you have some thoughts about community and how we bring that forth.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's really exciting to hear such a wide span of the virtual experience. To answer your question, I've attended so many virtual events, especially in the beginning of quarantine. It felt like everyone just wanted to connect with each other and replicate in real life experiences online. So believe it or not, the latest one of that nature that I watched was the comedy show, which is really weird when people are all on mute and you can't take part of that audience experience. And then I also watched the Web is from Home award ceremony, and that one was interesting. And it was still very broadcast, but you could choose which order you wanted to see in terms of the acceptance speeches and nomination speeches, which were still kept at 5-word sort of acceptance speeches. So while they succeeded in keeping some of those Webby's, signature events aspects in there, I still couldn't talk to my neighbor. I still couldn't comment on this unless I hopped on another call with my friend.
So Dave, you're in the process of taking one of the biggest conferences on the planet, Oracle Open World, and delivering it into a series of events called Oracle Live. And how do you maintain community and kind of that through thread as you're stitching together multiple small events, and how are you approaching creating that connection?
Well, frankly, we're approaching it from a number of directions. We're experimenting and trying stuff and seeing what works. And to this point, I don't think we've hit on the magic formula. I think we came into this with a lot of assumptions about what attendees desire from an event experience. How can we take their expectations and frankly their needs from the real world, from the IRL to a virtual platform? And I think some of those assumptions on our part, I'll just say it, were flawed, because engaging online is a completely different mode of engagement than in person. And to try to recreate with only technological tools an atmosphere of collegiality, of informality, of accessibility through an online tool, how do you create a governance framework? How do you create a user experience framework? How do you create the expectation and the familiarity with the tool set to afford people that transparency, that ease of interaction, that, as I said, collegiality instantly? It's not possible. We can't hope to replicate it simply with a chat module. So I think the expectation that somehow we would drive engagement, which is my kill it with fire phrase. I never want to hear that phrase again unless you tell me specifically what you're talking about. We can't simply drive engagement by putting a blank chat box up on the screen and expect people to have a good experience with it. So this is what we're learning. As I said, we haven't hit on the magic formula yet.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people are playing with more to try and figure out, how can you create a new structure that supports that better online, and we've seen pluses and minuses with VR. We've seen VR kind of popping up, and in some places it can be great, but I think we've all also experienced literally trying to take a conference and put it in VR, and it's a very obstructive experience. So I'd love to hear the panel's conversations about that. But first, I do want to make sure we're almost 15 minutes in, and I want our listeners to start thinking about questions that you want to ask the panel, because towards the end, we will be opening up the floor to questions, and you can actually ask our panelists directly. So you can put that right into the chat here on the broadcast. So VR, pros and cons, what should we be using it for, not using it for? Michelle, I know you have a couple thoughts about this.
Just a couple. Working a lot of VR. So I think it's really funny because a lot of people say this is VR's heyday, right? Well, this is VR's moment, sorry. I'm not listening to anyone that says VR is dead, because it is literally not, if you actually spend any time in it and around the community. And I mean real people who have headsets, not just us who work in the biz. But it was an amazing opportunity. All of a sudden, everyone looked to VR. And you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people instantly thought, oh, we'll just replicate our conference in VR. And I think, David, to your point as well, you know, you can't expect to just lift something and recreate it. It's not about that. You actually, that's not the way to do it, right? So we saw that, but what we've also seen within the VR community is a real realization from a lot of people that solely VR is not necessarily the way to get the most, the biggest audience or the most engagement. So we've seen a real push since lockdown happened, since March, in more accessible VR. And a couple of notable examples where you've got things like Mozilla Hubs and AltSpace, where you can actually be in a VR headset, but a lot of other people can be in that environment, even interact in that environment, but they're doing it through web VR. And you've even got companies like Wave XR. Check them out. A bit of a buzz in the music industry right now. They made a bit of a play a couple of years ago. What they do is they take artists and they recreate them as avatars. So they're not doing volumetric. They're not doing, you know, exact replicas. They're creating them. So like John Legend has done a Wave XR concert, and more recently, The Weeknd did a concert in Wave XR. Now it used to be VR only. It used to be that you attended in VR. Well, this latest concert, the Weeknd, they built it all out in their XR platform, their 3D 360 sort of made for VR platform, but they broadcast it through TikTok, and they made it interactive through TikTok. So you've got this,
That's
you've got
pretty
a
cool.
real mixing. You've got a real mixing of things. So you've really got to think when VR is appropriate. You cannot sit down and spend 2+ hours in VR. It doesn't work. Also, you'd have to be tethered or recharged by that point. But we've seen a lot of success in events where breakout rooms or fireside chats or product demos and reviews are done in VR alongside broadcast keynotes. So you've really got to think about multimedia with VR if you're looking at it for conferences. It's incredibly good at what it does, but it's also multi-platform, which a lot of people don't realize or take advantage of. And it's also really good at some things. So you have to mix that into your event. Yeah.
And I know that Helena, you've had some conversations, some thoughts about what this means for content. Like we're talking about, you know, the engagement, but you still as a broadcaster of content need to think about how does my content need to change in order to adapt to this new environment. So please, you know, chat to that for a bit.
Definitely. I think on top of what Michelle is saying, we have to look at how do we cater now to a broader audience. Potentially, you can have a global audience at this point. And so how does your paid media, your earned media, and your content mix overall? How do you support this experience? And we know that people might not want to spend hours at a conference. They might just want to tap in for certain moments. How can you spread that experience for people who don't own a headset? Can you share that experience online through other means, even if it's not web AR? Are we talking about video snippets, or how can you just take part of the broader content mix? And also, what responsibilities come with having a global audience, as well as, you know, how do you target your core audience now that you know you have so many eyes on your content?
Now, I love that word core audience, because it kind of, you know, we were having our prep for this before, and we were talking yesterday about the fact that we're moving from sort of a world of event engagement to a world of continual engagement. That this is actually an opportunity to not do the normal dynamic of my big tentpole event. Everything goes crazy for 2 or 3 months before and after and during, and then it basically goes dark until it's time to start flogging people for the next tentpole event. And the one opportunity here is to start giving people a more continual and consistent engagement to the world and there's an opportunity for that as well. And David, I'm going to start with you because I'm already starting to see this with Oracle Live.
Yeah, and that's a good direction to go in, Chris. I think one of the things that is challenging, frankly, in this new environment is changing mindsets and sort of reprioritizing content calendars. And big organizations turn slowly, but what we need to be doing is listening more. I think in a live event sort of paradigm, it is the big guy on the stage talking to an audience of 30,000 people, and his face is the only promotion you need, right? So we promote based on a marquee name, a big pop band, like you said, and it becomes an event. But what I think the market and our constituents, really, who we serve, our customers, is really hungry for is a much more consistent, responsive approach to customer communication, customer engagement. And I think we could all take a lesson. We inside of a big organization can take a lesson from our corporate comms, our PR, and our social teams, and adapt some of those techniques, both on the promotional side and on the content production side, to serve our constituents better instead of expecting them just to wait around until the next big tentpole event. And I think the point about global audience versus core audience is an excellent one. We're going to need to scale, frankly, to capture the global requirements for how people want to interact with the information, what information is relevant to them, how do we surface libraries of content, and again, how we tailor content to a global audience instead of, like you said, the core people who are sitting in the room.
Yeah, I love you said that because in our prep yesterday, Michelle, you talked about content extensibility, and sort of like repurposing it. Dig into that for a second for us.
Yeah. So David, to your point, I really like that you brought up content calendars, because I think that brands traditionally have been used to planning things and then bringing it out piece by piece. Content extensibility and virtual environments, or just digital environments in general, allow a brand to create something, create an environment, create assets that is actually permanent, is a place, is a destination. And we can host things in that environment. So rather than pushing out individual pieces of content that don't really have a home, they may have a Facebook feed, or they may have a YouTube playlist or something like that. They may all exist on our website. We now have the opportunity to recreate real environments, like 3-dimensional environments, and actually put our content there, host our events in there. So we can create a space for these things to live. And also, a lot of this is 3D, right? A lot of these assets that we're starting to build are 3-dimensional. Well, you can build a 3D asset for a product launch. You then have that 3D asset that then goes on your e-commerce site, that then goes into your online tutorials, your video content, your launch content. So it can go into augmented reality and virtual reality experiences. So I think there's two things. One is assets being extensible. Another is potentially owning an environment, brand owning that, and that becoming a place where people expect engagement to happen.
That's great. However, we've now extended the engagement through David. We've extended the content through Michelle. But Helena, I know you have a concern about fatigue.
I do. I mean, I feel the fatigue. We all feel the fatigue because we're on Zoom all day long, or other services for our work. And so I think, what I think we'll have to look at is, it makes sense that we're seeing so many events that are replicated because they've been planned for. And so you already have an audience there, you already have all your marketing money. And so that's why we're seeing so many of these sort of events that you would expect to see in the real world. But I think technology will continue to play a role, and has always played a role in the marketing mix. So I think you'll see events eventually that don't require you to feel like you're at work when you're experiencing them, or that you're just being spoken to. I think you'll see something like IKEA had a mixed virtual / IRL event in Tokyo, where you had a whole living room scenario set up and placed an influencer virtually in that environment. And you could also live stream this from anywhere in the world. So I think we're gonna see events and brand experiences, frankly, move online to a bigger extent, and not just as replicas of regular events. So I think that will help with the fatigue, because we're not just experiencing one type of event online. But it takes so much time to plan it, so I think that's why we haven't seen it before.
And
Can I just say something really, really quickly with the fatigue thing? I think that's also why you see like brands popping up in places where people already are, you know, like the Fortnite concerts, the TikTok concerts, things like that, because I think they're trying not to like create a new channel, a new event. They're trying to be where people are. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I think that's great, because we've just sort of landed now on this new model that people are starting to talk about, which is hybrid events. You know, not just pushing everything online, but looking to Elena and Michelle's point, how you can mix and bring even in real life events back in online. And that sort of begs the next question to me, which is, we've talked about, you know, obviously as people putting on the events, but let's talk about, you know, the vendors and the people attending these things. Let's go for their side. I mean, one of the nice things about digital events is no one has to be in the corner of the hall anymore, do they? There's no bad placement anymore in a virtual event. So, you know, David, we'll start with you on this one. You know, how should vendors and attendees now be looking at these, and how can they maximize their experiences?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Not being too connected in with sort of the partner and vendor side of events, I can only speak from my experience as an attendee. I think even if a vendor gets a kind of a low visibility position on the conference floor, if they're a draw, they're still gonna get walk-ups. But if somebody's expecting their position in the hall to be the driver of attendance to their demos, they need to rethink that strategy. And now's the opportunity to rethink it. And I think in terms of you know, conference participation and buying booth space, that whole model needs to be rethunk. And I think I would give priority and premium spots to vendors and partners who have a very solid, you know, multi-platform experiential offer that they're going to bring to my event. It isn't just about how much money you can drop, although that helps, how big of an, you know, LED sign you have above your booth. It's how are you going to drive traffic to my event? How are you going to get people excited about attending your demos? So I think potentially it's more work on the vendor side to come up with new strategies that will earn them marquee placement versus, you know, I have a big name and a big LED display and you know, and attractive people in skimpy outfits.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, especially for events that pride themselves on being unique experiences for attendees and partners. That's going to be really interesting to watch how they pivot on exactly this. And I know that several of us already got our outreaches this week for South by Southwest, and that's going to be interesting to see how an event which is expressly driven to create unique real life experiences to the point where you're, you know, recreating movie sets out in the desert. How are they going to transition to this? I mean, Michelle, how do you take something from South by Southwest and make that online?
Well, I mean, we all ask ourselves that question this year, whether they were going to do it or not, or whether they were going to take things online. I actually think that, you know, not on the vendor side who show up at these events to flog their wares, but the organizers like South by Southwest, like CES organization, or the companies behind them, they are going to have to do a much better job at selling to vendors if they want them to come. Yes, they need to sell to guests as well, like attendees, us normal folk who go along, but they're also going to have to do a much better job at selling to people who pay them money to have booths and to have space there. And I would hope that they're starting to do the research now, or that they have done the research, and that they're not just looking at what we can take online, but what can we offer in terms of services and interactive platforms and things like that. Because as a brand, I already know that a lot of brands have rethunk their CES attendance, right? Also because they're not necessarily trusting that the organizers are going to have a platform that's going to do their brand justice and the experience justice. And I think they're right to question that. Sorry, CES and some other organizers.
No,
I would question that with South by Southwest as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And you look at sort of what have been bellwether activations, like the Westworld activation a couple of years ago that they did at South by Southwest. Elena, how do you get brands to understand how they need to rethunk this? Because that's our word today, rethunk.
Yeah, I like that word. I mean, there are so many questions popping up in terms of this. There are, brands that already have a lot of experience in this world and want to show up to South by Southwest, maybe using whatever platforms they have set up and really shine there and make a splash. Whereas you probably have other brands that are a little bit maybe more scared to enter that world and will maybe take a step back and see what are other people going to do for Southwest 2021. I want to join for 2022 when we might be in a more of a hybrid role world. But I mean, obviously, it's all of our work, like people like Michelle and I, to bring in that confidence of what does the future look like, and the future is now. What can we do based on the technologies that we know? And I think guiding principles have to be, how do we make this relevant? What really is the core of the experience that people want to, that we want people to experience, and focus on that to make that really, really good and a really, really impressive experience for people. And I think you can broaden out from there to just take a small, concentrated step in that direction.
And you looked at what Tribeca just did, the film festival. They did a really good job of that hybrid style. Well, not hybrid necessarily because it wasn't in person, but their VR, around the VR exhibit, they created a VR hall. People could get together and go gondoling. They could chat. They could go into the experiences and experience them. I think there's some like niche events that have already started doing it. So I think the big guns need to really look to what's been working with other people.
Absolutely. We're halfway through this, so I just wanted to again let people know that they can ask questions in the chat, and I will direct them to our panelists, and all the miracles and wonders they know will be yours to find out. So Michelle, I'm going to circle back to something you just said, and it's a question I'm going to put out to the panel. You get the call tomorrow. You pick up your phone, and it's CTA. And they say, you're in charge of CES this year. What should we do? And I just would love to hear how you would do CES this year, because I think that's the event that everyone is looking to sort of figure out what next year is going to look like. Let's see, who am I going to put on the spot here? Elena, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, all of these events, I'm just going to say, think about the experience for the user and make that a really great event. I would give people the freedom to navigate the program. So I think it's really important to have these small live events where people get goodies and extra connectivity by attending in that moment, but also give people freedom to explore the schedule on their own, at their own pace, and choose the snippets they want to see. I think that's going to be very important.
Michelle?
It's an idea I'd already talked about, but I love all of those ideas, by the way. I think that they need to do a really good job of supporting the vendors, and I think it's something that they already should have done, but basically do like roving interviews. So have different tracks where at different times of the day you can tune in, and there's like a journalist, a moderator, who's actually going and talking to some of the different booths and experiences, and you can tune into that because it's a little bit more engaging. It's a little bit more like a podcast or a live show, and it's not just a whole bunch of people soapboxing, for half an hour each, or allowing people to, go and discover on their own. That should all be there as well, both of them, both ends of the scale. But I think a lot more guided experience would be really useful.
So basically using the content on the floor to fuel a more immersive online experience.
Yeah, but in multiple tracks, not because right now it's fragmented, because right now it's a lot of different publications send their own people. So you're watching one or the other, or you don't even know that they exist. But I think for people tuning in for brief periods of time, it would be great if CTA themselves actually potentially worked with either a publication or had their own people curating and moderating and driving that discovery.
In a weird way, I actually think this is a huge opportunity for CTA because CES, and I don't know what your experiences were, but the last couple of years, but for me, CES has actually turned into 4 CESs. And most people, like most of the big company folks, will stay on the main convention center floor, will never leave. Startup, you mentioned IoT, Michelle, they're going to hang out the Sands the entire week. Marketing and agency folks, they're down at ARIA and probably staying there. And a lot of people I know will just pick one of those areas now and will never really visit the rest of CES because it's become so unwieldy. And I think this is an opportunity for them. And I'd love to hear David's is to take what has been one monolithic event and maybe not just change it into different tracks, as Michelle said, but literally turn it into a series of shows. David, what would you do with this monster?
Well, I would take a note from both Helena and Michelle's suggestions and add an emphasis on differentiation for the user. And I think back to my earlier point about listening to your user and responding to their need. One of the biggest challenges at Open World has always been session overlap and geographical distance between sessions as the event expanded. I mean, you mentioned with CES and similarly with NAB, you cannot see it all. And the biggest miss for those events is not understanding your audience well enough to know who needs to know what's going on when it's actually happening. And so I think there needs to be more emphasis on an AI-driven event assistant, like a concierge approach for attendees to ensure that they're getting the most out of their registration dollars and the most out of their time, whether it's attending a live event with interaction, if you have questions or specific use cases or needs that you need to delve into, or whether it's industry knowledge, best practices. Conversely, social interactions and networking. I think we need to do a better job up front at the intake, on the intake side, of engaging our users, drawing from their social media presence, drawing from surveys and polling about what they want to get out of the experience, and then pushing them opportunities. That to me, I mean, completely distinct from the platform approach and how the event UI is laid out. To me as an attendee, that's my biggest challenge, and that's what I'd like to see addressed.
Well, and Michelle brought that up earlier too, where she talked about those little moments of engagement you get. We're talking about these big moments. Yeah, how do we take a keynote? How do we do breakout sessions? But those little moments, like when you sit down at a table at a lunch with 8 people you don't know, and the conversations that happen at that table, or when you're chatting to the people to the left and the right of you as you're getting ready for that keynote, how do we craft those little moments that really are kind of the connective tissue that makes us all really benefit from a conference? So how do we create those little moments as well? Helena.
Yeah, I was going to mention earlier that the only virtual conference that I've seen lately that I was kind of excited to potentially attend would be the Next Web's conference, where they actually have so many tracks laid out for you. It's at a reasonable price, and it feels like it's going to be well produced. Obviously, it's kicking off early October. But I think those little moments is about knowing your audience. So what David says makes a lot of sense. Look at the data that we see from the intake and see, could it even be that up front you're saying, I'm open to connecting with this type of professional. I'm looking for these opportunities, and see what people are open to collaboration. Or if you're more of a loner and you really don't want to sign up for that, cater that experience to them. And I think just finding smaller rooms, whether that's chat or connecting people in any other way, just smaller venues where you feel like you don't have the eyes of everyone on you when you're interacting with people. You really can't replicate human connection that well over a chat window, as we've already said. So just finding unexpected ways to connect and create serendipity, I think, is going to be key.
I love that word. Yeah, that's really, I mean, It's part of the beauty of the real world is the spontaneous connections that we make just simply because we're standing in the same spot. And it has to be a balance between a structured experience and a free-form spontaneous experience. And it's really difficult to achieve.
Yeah, Michelle, I mean, how do we find those whispers?
Yeah, I think because we were talking about sitting in a huge keynote, right, and that you're passing a note back and forth or whispering. Some people can't whisper, and that's annoying. But like you're having a little micro interaction because something that the keynote speaker said, really resonated or sparked an idea. There are a number of different things I think we can pull from collaboration software that's working right now. So from whiteboards to noteboards to, sort of like Mural, Miro, even whiteboards through XD or Zoom, where I would love, for example, to go into a conference, a digital conference, connect with the people that I know in real world are also watching it that day as well, whether they're on watching it or not, and have some sort of communication loop with them. Now, we would use WhatsApp or text messages or things like that, but maybe the actual platform or conference itself provides that. And then you can have shared notes. So imagine being able to scribble something for somebody, a text chat, but also be able to draw something and have these spaces so that when I come away from it, I have notes and connection and experience that were connected to certain moments in time. I mean, this is real roadmap stuff, right? Like this is, okay, this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. We're going to be digital for the foreseeable future. Let's build some tools that are actually useful, I think. Yeah.
I love it. You said that. That's a perfect lead into my next question, which is going to be, we've talked about Zoom and we've talked about all these technologies that sort of exist today. Whether you're a brand or whether you're someone putting on the event, what are the technologies people are not thinking of that may be applicable to sort of this new world? What are other things? And Dave, you kind of mentioned the idea of reaching into social media to curate communities in advance of the event. I think we've all been in Bright Talk or On24 or one of those platforms where you want to get into the chat stream, but it's like Twitch on steroids. So there's no way to get in there. So I'd love to hear about how we can interleave, like Dave said, using social media to more inform a community. What other technologies that sort of are outside our sphere should we be thinking of that can inform what's happening within a conference? And Helena, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many examples of utilizing technology or other platforms like, what's this game called that everyone played? Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing.
So, you have developers arranging their own little conferences and micro hubs in there. What kind of where's your audience right now and how can you tap into that moment? I think is interesting, but it would also be, and I don't have any tools to name drop, but co-creation. I am not a Burning Man attendee, but I know that art is a really big part of attending that conference. And I think that they actually recreated some sort of co-creation environment in their virtual experience. So looking at natural behaviors for that conference or for that event and finding different ways of enabling that, I think it will be key.
Michelle?
Yeah, I love the co-creation part of it. You're right. There's so many events that are held in alt space or held in these other environments or in Burning Man VR. And people danced together and they painted together and they explored together, and that can be really, really meaningful. I think bringing it back to something we said earlier about multi-platform is knowing when you can augment things as well. And I mean that literally. So, having a keynote or having a breakout session where everybody who is potentially, attending can get a web AR link and they can all look at something in 3D at the same time. And you can add co-creation to that because you can have multi-user interactive AR now. And just using some of those other hybrid tools that already exist. So much of this stuff already exists. It's really about integrating it at the right points. And making sure that, you're finding out who the attendees are and what motivation they have for being there, what rewards you can give them. Yeah.
Well, you're seeing this with some sports teams now that are starting to, the fans can't go to the stadium, so the stadium has to come to the fans. And what you're seeing with some teams is they are sending you kind of fan packs like food and drinks and things that you'd be having if you were physically at the park. So you can be at home, but still be eating as if you were at the park. And I think that's an interesting model to start to think of. How can we create little tiny snippets of the real world and bring that to people to augment, to your point, that virtual experience that you're having?
But also, is that virtual merch? Maybe we're tired of the goodie bags at the events and have more use for whatever it could be that we could supply virtually and use in your virtual everyday.
We can sell Fortnite skins to people at conferences.
Yeah.
It's a new revenue model. But actually, you brought up Fortnite, Michelle, and I think, as we look at what this looks like a year from now, 3 years, sort of landed on of tent pole events and these big events, and what you're trying to deliver in terms of content and experience is changing. And obviously everybody knows about Travis Scott in Fortnite at this point. But should we be looking to things like Fortnite? Should we be looking at what Epic and Unreal and Unity can deliver and start to think about, okay, so if we just sort of shed what we think a conference is and relook at it in a purely digital fashion, how can people look to those things to be informed on what this looks like going forward? Michelle, I see you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I mean, I think that you need to look. I think that we in the industry can be quite jaded, and I think that we really need to look at. I use this expression all the time: how real people or normal people are actually engaging with each other, and they will jump through certain hoops to make things work, with hacks or creating communities on Discord when they're working in other environments, or they'll jump around and create a tech mix that works for them. And I think that what we can then look at is those behaviors and how we can build that more seamlessly and intuitively into what we create. But nobody is equal. Like there's no one size fits all. And I think that a lot of these tentpole experiences blurred that truth and sort of covered it up. And now we can't get away from the fact that attendees are different and want different things. And that's the issue that I think advertising in general, I'm just going to put it out there, has had in the last sort of 10 years. It's gone very one size fits all. None of this is one size fits all, and that's glorious.
David, obviously Oracle Open World, a gigantic tentpole event, and we were having a conversation before this broadcast about, did these tentpole events become gravity wells that just sucked everything around them in terms of engagement experience? I mean, how are you looking at what do we bring over and what do we not bring over, and what changes?
Well, the analogy that our CMO, Ariel Kelman, likes to use is radio on television, right? In the early days of television, basically the major 3 networks would just put a newsreader in front of a camera, and with a microphone, they would just read the news. Until you understand the capabilities of the new platforms, the new media, the willingness of the audience to engage in a new experience and learn how to operate in this new environment. With the exception of the developer community, everybody else is still feeling pain points around virtual conferences. So, to take that leap from, a single speaker keynote to you've got 4 different ways to attend the conference on 2 different platforms, with goggles, without goggles. It's like, I want to see some real, robust, legitimate audience research that tells us what people are down for. Like, what would you be willing to do? To your point, Michelle, what hoops would you be willing to jump through? And how far can we push put a burden on the audience to learn new technologies, and how much work do we have to do to mediate the experience? What amount of mediation is the right amount of mediation? And those are the big questions we haven't answered yet. We're still looking at this from, what's still going to work? What is left to throw up in the Zoom window? What is left to put on our website that we used to do in the real world that'll still work? But it's time for a rethink, and nothing short of a rethink is going to work.
I'm going to go one step back because I've actually gone through a bit of a research project with this. It's looking at why we used to do things why we did the things we used to do.
Yeah.
So as an event organizer or person who put something on, we went through and mapped like trade shows. We used it as an example as a women in event production group I'm in, and I'm leading this hybrid project. And we went through and we looked at all of the reasons that an operator, like an organizer, puts it on, all of the reasons that a vendor would be there, all of the reasons that attendees would go, and the pros and cons of all of them. And then we started to look at, well, what solutions exist and how can we actually fix some of the cons? Because we're not looking at just replicating the pros, we're looking at fixing some of the cons, creating new pros. And I'm jumping all over the place here, but yeah, really looking at the motivations for what used to work in physical and why, and how we can do better or support that. Yeah.
I see Helena nodding.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, no additions. It's just, and we go through this every time there's a new technology. When VR became more accessible to people, everyone wanted to do something in VR. You know, back in the day when Facebook was new for businesses, it was like us on Facebook. But why should I like you on Facebook? Why should I take part of your experience? It's the same thing with whatever comes up. So just really looking at what technology will benefit your purpose, and the human behavior portion is huge in deciding that.
Yeah, that's true. David, go.
I can't like that enough. Technology for technology's sake. The classic example is somebody new and very high up in an organization comes in and says, hey, I just saw my teenager on this platform. Let's do something on this platform. That's not a way to drive innovation. It's a way to make yourself, frankly, look silly in the marketplace because you're not going to execute it well and you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
I get we want to do AR all the time. And I say, do you really? Let's discuss that.
I was a partner at a branding agency when the Snap Spectacles came out, and God, we had a lot of conversations about those. One of the things that people are looking to as we talk about these new interfaces and new relationships we're having with our online audience is there's been a lot of digital ink spilled on looking to gaming. What can gaming teach us about these interactions? Because that's the one sector of technology that is going gung-ho right now because of everyone staying at home. We've seen the chaos of the new PlayStation and Xbox launches. You know, but also I fear we're, to your technology point, we are falling into the gamification trap where we think we can just take gamification, stamp it on anything. But there are some interesting things like Twitch and that are changing relationships. So have any of you sort of been looking in gaming as sort of what this can teach us or inform us about how to maintain this relationship? And Dave, I see you nodding.
I was nodding in agreement with the gamification as the word of the month that everyone likes to flog on the throne of engagement, right? Like because your kid is on Fortnite all day or Animal Crossing, somehow you take that construct of conveying story and information and just magically transpose it into a Fortune 500 industry event context. You're not thinking about your audience. You're not thinking about what kind of content you're going to have to create to put in this environment. What kind of a, runway you're going to need to create all this content. Interactive experiences are kind of complicated and need some forethought. So just saying, we should probably do some thinking before we go down that road. And unfortunately, it's grasping at straws at this point. And I would rely on, Michelle and Helena to guide in this area. I think there's a lot of potential value to that approach, because people want to navigate their own virtual realities. They want to create their own stories. They want to follow their own interests. So building the world is building a world. You're not just dropping somebody into a virtual convention space a la 2003 with a bunch of, Second Life avatars that are anime. I mean, I'm puzzled as to why that's somehow perceived as a good thing still.
Yeah, I think what we can learn from gaming is the connectivity and community between people. But we have to remember that, and we see a lot of innovation in gaming, right? That's where it's most tangible to most of us. Like, oh, you can now do this in this gaming environment. I think we can still borrow a lot of the technological platforms, but we got to remember that games take years to develop. People play these games because they love the game and the storytelling, and they're, they have that purpose in going into the game. So I think it's really touching upon community, Twitch for live streaming. Yes, we can use components of all that, but we cannot just gamify and think that the motivations will be the same for a branded activity. But there's a lot of opportunity in terms of economy of virtual world, as we've been talking about. So just in terms of content and just, these human behaviors, which you can replicate online. So yeah, I think it's just about, as with any other buzzword, just see what are we really looking after, to Michelle's point earlier. What are the actual behaviors? What are we actually trying to achieve here to solve the problem, not just by gamification.
Yeah, and you're right, like games about connectivity and community, that's one aspect of games, especially modern games. Or if we think back to like LAN games, remember we used to bring our PC towers over to my house. My boyfriend, not me. And there's other things like autonomy and discovery in games as well. So, trying something and seeing if it's the right thing, there's a response there, there's interactivity there as well. And so looking at the things in gaming worlds that attract people and the things in gaming worlds that reward people and incentivize them to keep going or to interact. And a lot of brands want to put too many boundaries on things, and they don't like it that somebody might come in and graffiti all over their brand, or they might, want to build in, no, but everyone is going to do this, right? Or they might want to build in a million different responses so that somebody picks something up, and if I shake it, then it does this, and if I do something else, but not everyone needs that. This is such a big topic about people not really understanding what. It's funny because it's ourselves. We also play games. It's not really understanding the true motivation behind why we do it and why we continue to do it. Once you crack that for your brand or your particular use case, there's some really great lessons to be learned.
Well, I've seen a couple events recently go onto Twitch, and they're like, hey, we're doing Twitch, to your point, doing AR. And what they were doing was an event with one camera in one position, and to David's predicate problem, they basically just replicated broadcast television and threw the stream onto Twitch, and they thought they were doing Twitch. And I'm like, that's not it, Chief. My son is into gaming, and he would rather watch an esports tournament on his tablet than in real life in arenas with gigantic screens. And the reason is, when he's on Twitch, he can, to David's point, he can control that experience. He gets to watch what he wants. If he's watching League of Legends and suddenly one of the mid lanes is going ham, he can switch to that himself. He can decide how he wants to consume that content at that moment in time. And to your point, Michelle, that's going to be a hard thing for brands to accept, that you have to give up control to give people a better experience and more engagement. And I think that'll be an interesting conflict / struggle as we move forward in this. Dave.
And honestly, I think this is not only, this problem you expressed quite eloquently is not confined simply to the virtual event space, but to a brand's overall presence. We can't continue to dictate message, context, location, and purpose. We need to walk the walk of being responsive and to our users' needs. And it takes the brand marketer out of a position of primacy in that conversation and elevates the audience, the user, the participant. As in the gaming world, you're only as good as your career best, right? And you get respect by virtue of your cred versus you get respect by virtue of the size of your podium or the loudness of your megaphone. Very
true. And we're reaching the end here, and I wanted to throw out one more kind of flash question to everybody. I think we all agree that at some point, we can't call it, but at some point live events will start coming back. But my question to the panel, and I'll start with you, David, of course, is the tentpole conference dead?
No, it's not dead, but it will emerge radically changed, downscaled, more efficient, less wasteful, I hope, more targeted, and more user-focused.
Helena?
No, it's not dead, but I think you'll have people are going to expect that they can take part of your conference virtually. They expect a choice between attending and taking part of it digitally.
Yes.
Michelle?
Potentially. I think some may not recover from this. And I think that you're going to see a lot more, got some feedback, see a lot more brands take advantage of owning their own space and potentially doing more themselves to own their ecosystem and to own their presence. Yeah, because they're giving a lot of money to these organizers, a huge amount of money. And then we're paying a huge amount of money to attend. That didn't seem sustainable.
No. Well, we are at the end here. So Helena, Michelle, Dave, thank you for spending an extraordinary amount of time with us. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully everyone got something new to think about, or maybe a different approach that they hadn't considered, and get some benefit from this. So with that, I'll turn it back to Bessie.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It was a really informative discussion, and I'm sure, as most panels go, we could talk about this forever. So thank you, everyone who attended. Be on the lookout for our next Lunch and Learn, as well as we are doing our golf tournament this year. So check it out. It's November 12th. Should be a good way to actually see some people in person for the first time in many, many months, which is exciting. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.